This is my true story. For years, my family believed peace meant silence. I kept quiet because I thought it protected them. But one afternoon, my granddaughter walked into my room holding a photograph that should never have been found. Her voice shook when she asked, "Grandma, why is your hand on that baby's mouth?" I froze. She didn't know what she was holding. That photo carried everything we tried to bury decades ago. My heart stopped, and my past finally caught up. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. She came into the room quietly, the way children do when they know they're not supposed to touch something. Her small hands were gripping an old photograph, edges torn and browned with age. I recognized it before she even spoke. My stomach dropped. She looked at me with wide, uncertain eyes and said, "Grandma, why is your hand on that baby's mouth?" Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't answer right away. My throat went dry. The photograph had been hidden for more than 40 years, buried deep inside a box that was never meant to be opened again. She held it up, expecting a simple explanation, like all children do. But there was no simple answer. The picture was grainy, half burned on one side, and showed a younger version of me holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. My hand was near the baby's mouth, my face frozen mid-expression. Not smiling, not crying, just tense. It was taken seconds before everything changed. I had hidden it after that night, swearing I'd never look at it again. But time has a way of unearthing what you think you've buried for good. I tried to keep my expression calm, but inside, everything in me was trembling. That single photograph was proof of a moment no one was supposed to know existed. My granddaughter didn't understand what she was looking at, but I did. Every part of that image was burned into my memory. The night, the storm, the cries, the silence that followed. She stood there waiting. Her innocence made it worse. She didn't mean to accuse. She just wanted to know. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. What could I say? That it wasn't what it looked like? That the truth was heavier than the picture itself? My hands felt cold. The room suddenly seemed smaller. I reached for the photograph gently, hoping she would let it go, but she stepped back, holding it tighter. "Grandma, what is this?" she asked again, louder this time. I said softly, "What photo?" pretending not to see it, hoping denial would end the conversation. It didn't. Her face changed, confusion first, then hurt. She looked at me like she didn't recognize who I was anymore. That look cut deeper than the question. Then she turned and ran. I heard her small footsteps down the hallway, the front door opening, her voice crying out for her mother outside. I stayed frozen in my chair. I didn't chase her. I didn't call out. My body couldn't move. My heart beat slow and heavy, not from fear of being exposed, but from the realization that the past had finally found its way back into my house. The photograph wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Years ago, I had tried to burn it, but the fire didn't take it completely. The edges burned. The center survived. I told myself it was a warning, a reminder of what silence costs. I had kept it locked away in the old cedar chest under the bed, thinking no one would ever find it. I forgot that children always find what adults hide best. For a long minute, I just sat there staring at the doorway she had run through. The sound of her crying faded into the distance. I looked down at my hands, old and trembling, and remembered how those same hands once tried to save a life. The picture made it look like something else, and once a photo tells its story, people stop listening to the truth. The house felt colder than before. The clock ticked, the floor creaked, and every sound felt heavier. I knew what would come next. My daughter would call. She always did when trouble started, and this time, trouble wasn't an accident. It was history catching up. I picked up the phone before it even rang because deep down, I already knew who would be on the other end. I hadn't thought about that night in years. I had pushed it down so deep that it felt like it belonged to someone else's life. But the moment I saw that photo again, everything came back. The room, the storm, the noise, the silence that followed, it was all there, waiting for me. I had buried that memory long before my granddaughter was even born. The baby in that picture wasn't hers, wasn't mine either. It belonged to my daughter, And the night that photo was taken was the night everything in this family broke, even if no one knew it yet. She was just 19 then, scared and unprepared. The baby came early, too early. I remember her screaming from her room, and I ran in, trying to help. The power was out, the wind was howling outside, rain beating against the windows. The whole house felt like it was holding its breath. The baby was crying weakly, choking on something, and my daughter was frozen. I did what I thought any mother would do. I reached for the child, tried to clear its mouth, tried to get it to breathe right. I pressed too hard, maybe. I don't know anymore. The crying stopped, and the world went still. When I looked at my daughter, her face was blank. She didn't move. She didn't speak. I kept saying the baby would be fine, that we'd get help. But we didn't. The storm had cut off the phone lines, and by the time the doctor arrived, it was too late. He said complications. That word has followed me ever since. It covers everything and explains nothing. My daughter never looked at me the same after that. She said I should have waited, said I made it worse. I tried to explain that I was trying to help, but she didn't believe me. She didn't tell anyone else, not the neighbors, not the police, not even the priest. We buried the baby quietly 2 days later in a small grave without a name. I wanted to put a marker, but she refused. She said we needed to move on. We didn't. We just stopped talking about it. A week later, someone took that photo. I never found out who. Maybe a neighbor, maybe my daughter, maybe someone who wanted proof of what happened. All I knew was that when I saw it, I felt sick. It made everything look wrong. The image froze 1 second of panic and turned it into accusation. My hand over the baby's mouth. People see that and think harm, not help. My daughter kept it for a while, then gave it to me, saying she couldn't bear to look at it. I should have destroyed it then. Instead, I hid it. Years went by. My daughter built a life, married, had another child. She raised her family like nothing had happened. I let her. I played my role as the quiet grandmother who never questioned, never reminded, never spoke of the past. But the guilt never left either of us. We just wore it differently. She wore hers as distance. I wore mine as silence. And now, all those years later, that silence had cracked open because a child found a photograph. My granddaughter had no idea what it meant, but I could see how it would look to her. A hand on a baby's mouth, no context, no explanation. She would see danger where there had once been desperate love. I sat in that room for a long time after she ran out, thinking about how time doesn't erase things. It just hides them until someone innocent stumbles over the truth. The past doesn't stay buried, no matter how deep you dig. It waits for the moment when you're old, tired, and least prepared to face it again. And that moment had just come back for me. It was raining harder than I had ever seen that night. The wind pushed against the house, rattling the windows, and the power went out around midnight. My daughter was in the next room, her voice breaking through the dark, calling for me. I remember running down the hallway with a candle, the flame shaking with every step. When I reached her, she was kneeling on the floor beside the crib, crying. The baby wasn't breathing right. The sound coming from its throat was faint and wrong, like it was choking on something. My daughter didn't know what to do. I told her to move aside. The storm had knocked the phone line down. There was no way to call for help. The nearest hospital was more than an hour away, and the road outside was flooded. I did the only thing I could think of. I picked up the baby. It was small, too small, its skin pale, its eyes barely open. I put my hand gently over its mouth and nose, not to hurt, but to clear what was blocking its breathing. I tilted the head the way a nurse had once shown me when she was born. I thought I was helping. I thought I was saving a life. My daughter stood there frozen, watching, her face full of fear. The candle flickered, the shadows moved, and the room felt like it was closing in. I tried again, rubbing the baby's back, whispering, praying under my breath. For one brief second, I felt it breathe again. Then nothing. No sound, no movement. The silence that followed was louder than any storm I had ever heard. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just stared at the baby and waited for something to change. My daughter finally fell to her knees and started shaking me, yelling, asking what I did. I couldn't answer. I didn't have words. I kept saying, it's okay, even though I knew it wasn't. We sat there for hours, both of us holding the child, waiting for the sun to rise. When the doctor finally came in the morning, he looked tired and quiet. He didn't ask many questions. He wrote something on a piece of paper and said the word complications. That one word closed every door. No one came. No one investigated. No one asked how a healthy baby could die in a night. Maybe he thought he was doing us a kindness. Maybe he didn't want to know. After the doctor left, my daughter refused to look at me. She stayed in her room, door locked, lights off. When she finally came out the next day, her face was blank. She said, "We're not going to talk about this again." I agreed, not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid that saying it out loud would make it real. We buried the baby in the small cemetery outside of town, not in the family plot, but in a corner without a name. No headstone, no flowers, just a small patch of dirt. I remember the sound of the shovel, the way the ground smelled wet from the rain. It was over, but it didn't feel finished. Nothing about it did. When we came home, she took all the baby clothes and toys and packed them into a box. Then she took the photograph, the one someone had taken that night. I don't know why they took it, or who it was. Maybe my daughter, maybe the doctor. All I know is that it showed the worst second of my life. My hand over the baby's mouth, my eyes wide, her face blurred in the corner. She kept that picture for a while, then gave it to me one night without saying a word. "You keep it," she said. "I can't." I hid it in a box and locked it away. I told myself that what happened wasn't my fault, but the picture didn't let me believe that. Every time I looked at it, I saw accusation instead of intention, so I stopped looking at it altogether. But the truth doesn't stay quiet forever. It just waits for the next person to find it. And this time, it was my granddaughter. The doctor wrote complications. That word saved everyone from questions. It meant no one had to explain, no one had to investigate, and no one had to hear what really happened. There were no police, no reports, no news, just silence and a baby buried without a name. My daughter never spoke about it again. She didn't cry at the burial. She just stared at the small grave and held her arms tight across her chest, like she was keeping something inside that she didn't want the world to see. That night when we came home, I washed the blankets, scrubbed the floor, and burned the rags. I didn't speak either. There are moments where grief and guilt look the same, and that was one of them. She wouldn't look at me. She went straight to her room and locked the door. When I knocked, she said, "Please just leave me alone." I did. From that day on, that sentence became the rule of our relationship. A week later, a man from the church came to offer prayers. She refused to see him. She said, "God already watched," and turned her back. That's when I knew the guilt had settled differently between us. I carried regret. She carried blame. I tried to talk to her once to explain what I did, but she didn't let me finish. "You took something from me," she said, and walked away. That was the last real conversation we had for years. We built a wall of silence between us. It kept peace on the surface, but it poisoned everything underneath. Family dinners became short and quiet. Holidays were just routines. Every time someone mentioned children, she'd change the subject. And I followed her lead, pretending that forgetting was the same as forgiving. She met her husband a few years later. They got married fast, and she moved out. I was relieved, not because I wanted her gone, but because I thought distance might make things easier. I was wrong. It just gave her more space to rewrite the story in her head. She told people the baby was stillborn, that it wasn't anyone's fault. But sometimes, in the way she looked at me, I could tell she didn't believe her own lie. Once, before she left, she came into my room with the photograph. "This is what I remember," she said, holding it like proof. "Your hand." I told her, "I was trying to help." She said, "You always say that." Then she folded the picture in half and walked away. That was the last time she mentioned it. Years passed. The baby's name was never spoken again. The grave stayed unmarked, and life moved forward like nothing had happened. She had another child later, my granddaughter. When I held her for the first time, I felt the same fear come back. Not fear of her, but fear of the memory she carried without knowing. Because blood remembers, even when the mind forgets. When my daughter brought her to visit, she'd always watch me closely, like she was making sure I didn't say too much. I never did. The past had been locked in both of us, and neither of us wanted to be the one to open it. But the truth doesn't rot. It waits. And it waited in that photograph, tucked away in a drawer I should have emptied long ago. Sometimes, late at night, I'd open that drawer and stare at the edges of the photo sticking out from under the papers. I'd think about burning it again. But I couldn't. Maybe I believed that destroying it would make it real all over again. Maybe part of me wanted it to be found, just so someone else could carry a piece of it for once. The police never came. No one asked questions. Everyone accepted complications as truth. But I've learned that silence is its own kind of crime. You don't need a courtroom for guilt. You just need time. And time never stopped reminding me. It was years later when I found the letter. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address. But I knew her handwriting the moment I saw it. I hadn't heard from my daughter in months. When I opened it, there were only a few lines written, short and cold. It said, "If she ever asks, tell her nothing." I knew exactly who she was. My granddaughter had just turned 10 at the time. My daughter must have been thinking about the future, about what might happen if questions started. That single sentence told me everything. She didn't forgive. She just wanted to control the silence. I folded the letter and placed it in my Bible drawer beside the photograph. I didn't respond. What was there to say? She didn't want conversation. She wanted protection, the kind that hides truth, not heals it. I had carried guilt quietly for so long that obeying came naturally. So I told myself I'd take the secret with me. I believed that time would erase curiosity, but time doesn't erase anything. It just changes who asks the questions. The photo had survived everything, the fire, the move, the years. I kept it in a small box under the drawer, wrapped in a handkerchief. I tried to forget it was there, but some nights I'd open it, stare at it, and put it away again. The same image every time. My hand, the baby, my daughter's shadow in the corner. I'd whisper to myself, I was trying to help. But guilt doesn't care about intention. It just sits with you. The letter stayed folded in that drawer for more than 20 years. Every time my daughter came to visit, she'd glance toward the dresser. She never mentioned it, but her eyes always went there. She knew it was still inside. It was her insurance, her reminder that I was still under her silence. The one time she almost mentioned it, she stopped halfway through her sentence. "Mom," she said, "if she ever finds something..." Then she paused and said, "Never mind." I nodded, pretending I didn't understand. But I did. I think she feared her daughter would learn the truth and turn against her the same way she turned against me. But fear doesn't stop truth. It only delays it. I could see the guilt in her eyes whenever she watched her child play, like she was seeing what she lost, what we both lost, but could never say out loud. Years passed quietly. My granddaughter grew up, smart and curious. Every time she visited, she wandered through old boxes, flipping through photos and letters. I used to smile and tell her, "Some things are best left alone." She'd laugh and say, "Grandma, I just like history." I never corrected her. I never told her that history isn't just stories. Sometimes it's evidence. The older I got, the more I thought about that letter. I'd read it sometimes when I couldn't sleep. The ink had faded slightly, but the words still carried weight. If she ever asks, tell her nothing. My daughter believed she was protecting herself. What she didn't understand was that silence doesn't protect anyone. It just transfers the pain forward. Children inherit more than blood. They inherit unfinished stories. And unfinished stories always come back to be told. So when my granddaughter found that photograph, part of me wasn't surprised. I had been waiting for that moment, even if I didn't admit it to myself. Maybe I wanted her to find it. Maybe I wanted someone to finally ask the question that had been buried for decades. Not because I needed forgiveness, but because the truth needed air. I never showed the letter to anyone. I kept it right where it had always been, beside the Bible, folded the same way. Even after the call came, the one that changed everything, it stayed there. When my daughter's voice trembled on the phone, telling me not to say a word, I realized something. She was still afraid of the truth. But I wasn't anymore. The letter was her way of controlling the story. But the moment my granddaughter saw that picture, the story stopped belonging to her. It belonged to all of us again. It didn't take long for the phone to ring. 5 minutes after my granddaughter ran out crying, the sound echoed through the house like a warning I already expected. I didn't rush to answer it. I let it ring twice before I picked up. The voice on the other end was tight, controlled, but shaking underneath. It was my daughter. "Don't tell her anything," she said. No greeting, no pause, just that. Her tone wasn't a request. It was an order. I didn't answer at first. I just listened to the sound of her breathing, short and uneven, the same way it had been on that stormy night years ago. Some fears never change. They just grow older. Finally, I said, "She already saw it." Silence followed. I could almost hear her thinking, her panic shifting into anger. "What did you say to her?" she asked quickly. I said, "Nothing." Another pause. Then she said it again, louder this time. "Don't tell her anything." Her voice cracked halfway through the word anything. That's when I realized she wasn't just scared of her daughter learning the truth. She was scared of reliving it herself. I told her, "She's upset. You should come." She hesitated. "I'll handle it," she said sharply. I said, "You've been handling it for 40 years. The line went quiet again. Neither of us hung up. We just sat there, listening to each other breathe, the past stretching between us through the static. Then she whispered, "You kept it?" I said, "You gave it to me." She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice dropped. "You were supposed to get rid of it." I said, "You were supposed to forgive me." She took a deep breath, and for a second, I thought she might finally say something honest. Instead, she said, "Don't tell her anything. She doesn't need to know." Then she hung up. I sat there for a while, staring at the phone. My hands were steady. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. She had spent half her life pretending the past never happened, and now she expected me to keep doing the same. But I couldn't, not anymore. My granddaughter deserved to know the truth, not the story her mother built out of fear, but the one built out of fact. The house was quiet again. I could still hear my granddaughter outside, her small voice crying in the distance. I walked to the window. She was sitting at the edge of the porch, knees pulled to her chest, holding the photograph like it was something alive. I didn't go to her, not yet. She needed time, and so did I. I sat back down and looked at the phone. I thought about all the times my daughter had used it to control the story. Every call, every warning, every silence. "Don't tell her anything." That sentence had become her entire life. She didn't understand that secrets don't disappear when you hide them. They just move to the next generation, waiting for someone brave enough to open the box. I picked up the photo again. The edges were bent, the image still clear enough to hurt. My hand, the baby, the faint shadow of my daughter in the background. I ran my finger over the surface, over my younger self frozen in that moment. People always say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but sometimes a picture erases all the words that matter. I placed the photo on the table and sat beside it, waiting. I knew she'd come. My daughter never let control slip for long. Sure enough, I saw her car pull into the driveway less than an hour later. Headlights flashed across the wall, then silence. She didn't knock. She just walked in. The door creaked open, and the air in the room changed. The past had finally arrived, and it wasn't coming quietly. She walked in fast, her footsteps sharp against the floor. The door was still swinging when she started speaking. "Where is it?" she asked, her voice low but trembling. I didn't answer. She looked around the room until she saw the photograph on the table. For a moment, she just stood there staring at it, her face pale and tight. Then she moved closer and snatched it up like it was poison. "You should have burned this," she said. I stayed seated. "You gave it to me," I said quietly. She turned toward me, eyes wild. "I trusted you to protect her from this." Her voice cracked on the last word. I could tell she'd been crying before she even arrived. Before I could answer, my granddaughter appeared at the hallway door. She must have heard the yelling. She stood there, small and silent, watching her mother and me like she was seeing two strangers. My daughter froze when she saw her, hiding the photograph behind her back as if the child hadn't already seen it. "Go upstairs," she said firmly. But the girl didn't move. She just whispered, Why are you fighting?" My daughter's eyes filled with panic, not sadness. "Go," she repeated, louder this time. The child stepped back but didn't leave completely. She wanted answers, but her mother was too afraid to give them. I stood up slowly. "She has a right to know," I said. My daughter turned on me fast. "No, she doesn't. Not this. You'll ruin her." I shook my head. "It's not her I'm ruining. It's the lie you built." That sentence stopped her for a second. She stared at me, speechless, then whispered, "You don't understand." I said, "I understand too well. You've been running from that night your whole life." She started pacing, holding the photo tight in her hand. "You don't know what it's like to grow up with that memory," she said. "Every time I looked at you, I saw it. You standing there, that look on your face like you didn't care." I took a slow breath. "I cared more than anyone," I said, "but caring doesn't matter when no one believes you." She stopped pacing then, her voice quieter. "You could have waited for help," she said. I answered, "There was no help to wait for." The silence that followed was heavy. My granddaughter had inched closer, her small face pale but curious. She whispered, "What happened?" My daughter turned to her quickly, shaking her head. "Nothing, sweetie." "Go to your room," I looked at her and said. "Don't lie to her." My daughter's eyes filled with tears again. "Please," she said, voice breaking, "don't do this. Don't make me live it again." I took a step closer. "You've been living it every day," I said. "You just buried it under pretending." I could see the fear in her eyes turn into anger again. "You'll destroy this family," she said. I looked at her and said, "It was already destroyed that night." We just stopped looking at the pieces. She didn't answer. She just stared at me like she wanted to yell but couldn't find the words. My granddaughter stepped fully into the room then, tears in her eyes. "Was there a baby?" she asked. My daughter covered her face with her hands. I nodded slowly. "Yes." The truth filled the room like cold air. No one spoke after that. My daughter sank into a chair, still holding the photo. "You don't know what you've done," she said quietly. "You've opened something we can't close again." I said, "Maybe that's what should have happened 40 years ago." We sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the clock on the wall. I could feel the tension ease just slightly, not because things were better, but because the pretending was over. The truth had been waiting for decades, and now it was finally standing in the open. When my granddaughter finally walked over and took my hand, she didn't ask anything else. She just held it. My daughter stared at the floor, the photograph still in her lap, her fingers shaking. For the first time, we were 3 generations in the same room, connected not by love, but by a truth none of us could ever erase. It was quiet for a long time after that. My daughter sat with her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. My granddaughter held onto my arm, her little fingers trembling, afraid to ask, but needing to know. The photograph sat between us on the table, the one thing none of us could ignore anymore. Finally, my daughter looked up at me. Her eyes were red, her voice almost a whisper. "Tell her," she said. I didn't move. "Are you sure?" I asked. She nodded once, slowly. She already saw. "She deserves to hear it from you." So I did. I told them everything. I told them about the storm, about how the lights went out, about how my daughter screamed for help. I told them about the baby gasping, choking, the panic that filled the room. I told them how I lifted the baby, how I tried to clear its mouth, how my hand pressed down without realizing how much force I used. I told them how the crying stopped, and how the silence filled the room like a wall. I told them how I begged for the baby to breathe again. My voice didn't shake. I'd carried this truth too long to cry anymore. My granddaughter started crying halfway through. My daughter didn't. She just stared at me, her face blank, absorbing every word like it was both new and familiar. I explained that the doctor came too late, that he said complications, that no one ever asked for details. I told them how I buried the photo, how I hid the truth, not to protect myself, but to protect her, my daughter, from reliving what she couldn't forgive. When I finished, no one spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking behind us. Then my granddaughter looked at me and said, "You were trying to help." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I looked at her and nodded once. She wiped her eyes and whispered, "Mom said you—" But she stopped herself. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I already knew what she'd been told. My daughter finally stood up. Her face was pale and still, but her eyes were softer now. "I blamed you because it was easier," she said. "If I blamed myself, I wouldn't have survived." Her voice broke. "You tried to save her." I know that now. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. After so many years of silence, words felt too small. She took the photo from the table and stared at it for a long time. "This picture ruined us," she said. I shook my head. "No, the lie did." She looked up at me then, and for the first time in 40 years, I saw my daughter, not the woman who carried anger like armor. She sat down again, holding the photo loosely in her hands. "We should have talked," she said. I said, "We were both too afraid to." My granddaughter looked between us, her face wet with tears but calmer now. "So the baby," she started to ask but couldn't finish. I said softly, "She was your aunt." That word hung in the air. My granddaughter looked down, her small voice trembling. "Does she have a name?" My daughter whispered. "Lydia." Hearing that name after all these years felt like letting air into a sealed room. For the first time since that night, the truth sat on the table with us, plain and unhidden. It didn't fix anything. It didn't bring peace right away, but it made the air in the room lighter. I could finally breathe without pretending. My daughter put the photo back on the table. "What do we do with it?" she asked. I said, "We don't hide it again." She nodded slowly. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. My granddaughter took my other. None of us spoke, but for the first time in decades, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a kind of freedom. The truth didn't heal us that night, but it balanced the weight. Some things don't disappear. They just finally find their place. The next morning, the house was silent, but it wasn't the same kind of silence I'd lived with for years. This one felt hollow, like the sound had been pulled out of every wall. I woke early, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table alone. The photo was still there, face down, exactly where we had left it the night before. My daughter and granddaughter were asleep in the next room. I stared at that picture for a long time without touching it. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was waiting for what would happen next. By the time the sun came through the curtains, my daughter came into the room. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her voice tired. She sat across from me, not saying anything. She looked at the photo but didn't reach for it. I poured her coffee, and for a while, that was all we did. Sit, drink, and breathe. Then she said, "I told her the truth." I nodded. She looked down, twisting her hands together. She didn't look at me the same after. I said, "She's a child. She's still learning what to do with the truth. Give her time." We didn't talk about the past anymore. There wasn't anything left to say. The words had already done what silence couldn't. They broke the chain. Now there was only what came after. My daughter said she needed space. She packed her things that afternoon, her movements slow and quiet. My granddaughter didn't say a word while she watched her mother fill a suitcase. When it was time to go, my daughter stood in the doorway, looking at me. "I don't hate you anymore," she said. Her voice cracked a little. "But I don't know how to love you yet." I nodded. "That's enough," I said. She nodded back and left. The car drove away, and the sound of the engine faded until it was gone. The house felt bigger, emptier. My granddaughter didn't go with her. She stayed. She said she wanted to stay with me for a few days. Maybe she didn't want to leave me alone, or maybe she wasn't ready to leave the truth behind. Either way, I didn't question it. That night, she helped me make dinner, quiet and thoughtful, like she was trying to understand me in a way her mother never could. When we finished eating, she asked if she could see the photograph again. I hesitated, then nodded. She picked it up gently, holding it with both hands. "She looked peaceful," she said softly. I didn't answer. My throat was too tight. Then she said something I'll never forget. It's sad, Grandma. But I think she knew you were trying to help. I felt something break inside me. Not pain, but release. For 40 years, I'd been waiting for someone to say that. The next morning, we went to the cemetery together. The ground was soft from the rain the night before. We walked to the far corner, where the unmarked grave still sat, untouched and forgotten. I hadn't been there in decades. My granddaughter knelt down and placed the photograph on the ground. She didn't cry. She just said, "She deserves a name." I nodded. We stayed there for a while, quiet. When we left, the photo was still there, pressed into the earth, half covered by the wind. For the first time, it didn't feel like a secret anymore. It felt like closure. When we came home, the house didn't feel heavy anymore. It wasn't empty either. It was just quiet in a different way, peaceful, like the storm that had been sitting in my chest for years had finally passed. My granddaughter smiled for the first time in 2 days. She helped me make tea and asked about my childhood, about her mother, about the old family stories that didn't hurt to tell. We talked until the sun went down. That night I slept better than I had in years. The nightmares stopped. The sound of that storm, the baby's cry, the silence after, all of it faded. The truth hadn't healed everything, but it had taken away the weight of pretending. The next morning, when I looked out at the yard, the air felt lighter. The past was finally where it belonged, buried, but not hidden. The days that followed were quiet. My granddaughter stayed a little longer, long enough for the house to feel alive again. We cooked breakfast together, took walks in the garden, and sat on the porch in the evenings when the light turned soft and gold. She didn't ask more about the photograph, and I didn't bring it up. Some truths don't need repeating. They just need to exist out in the open. One afternoon, she looked at me and said, "You're strong, Grandma." I smiled, but I didn't feel strong. I just felt free. For the first time in decades, there was no secret sitting between me and the people I loved. My daughter called a few days later. Her voice was calm but distant. She said she needed time to think. I told her that was fine. I'd waited 40 years. I could wait a little longer. Before she hung up, she said, "I found Lydia's birth record." I stayed quiet. Then she said, "It was time." That was all. When the call ended, I sat there holding the phone, realizing that after all these years, she had finally said the baby's name out loud. That meant more than any apology ever could. My granddaughter helped me frame a new photograph the next day. Not the old one, but a picture of the 3 of us taken that morning before she went home. We put it on the table where the other had been. The old photo was buried now, lying under the soil with the memory that had haunted us all. This one felt different. It wasn't hiding anything. It showed exactly what we were. 3 people who had survived something no one talked about, finally breathing in the same truth. The nights were easier now. I didn't wake up hearing the storm or the crying. I didn't reach for a drawer that held old letters or pictures I couldn't throw away. I'd stopped replaying the moment over and over, stopped asking what I could have done differently. The guilt had never left completely, but it had changed shape. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was quiet, like an old scar that doesn't hurt but reminds you what healing costs. I realized I'd spent most of my life carrying shame that didn't belong only to me. Now it was shared, finally divided, and that made it lighter. Sometimes I still think about that baby. I think about her tiny face, her stillness, the way the air felt when the world went silent. I used to believe that moment ended everything good in my life. Now I understand it didn't end it. It changed it. Pain doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it just shapes the way you love. I never had the chance to say goodbye to her properly, but through that truth, I did. The day we buried the photograph, I whispered her name under my breath. It felt like setting her free. My daughter hasn't come back yet, but she writes now. Short letters, small updates. She says she's trying to forgive herself for blaming me. I tell her in return that I'm trying to forgive myself for letting her believe the lie. We're not healed, but we're not broken anymore either. My granddaughter visits often. She still asks about Lydia sometimes. I tell her that her aunt was kind, even though she never got the chance to grow up. That seems to comfort her. It comforts me, too. Every now and then, I pass by the old table where that photo used to sit. The new picture stares back. Me, my daughter, my granddaughter. Three faces that finally tell the truth without speaking. The house feels lighter now, as if it exhaled with me. I know the story will live on through my granddaughter, but it won't be whispered in fear. It will be told with understanding, maybe even grace. The photo once showed a hand covering a baby's mouth. People saw silence, but I know what it really showed. A moment of desperate love, frozen and misunderstood. That's how life works sometimes. It takes years for people to see the difference between harm and help. I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about accepting what truth survives. The past is still there, but it doesn't own me anymore. And in that quiet freedom, I finally feel alive again.